He woke up that morning feeling the same crushing weight he had carried for years. The alarm clock rang, but instead of starting his day with energy, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had reached this point. He had once dreamed of becoming successful, of building something meaningful, of making his family proud, but somewhere along the way, life had knocked him down, and he had stayed down. His bills were piling up, his friends were moving forward while he was stuck in the same place, and every time he tried something, it seemed to fall apart before it even began. That morning, he felt defeated, almost ready to accept that this was all his life would ever be. Yet, deep inside, there was still a tiny spark, a whisper that asked, what if today could be different? He ignored it at first, but the more he lay there, the louder it became. By the time he sat up on the edge of his bed, his heart was racing. He looked at his tired reflection in the mirror and whispered to himself words he had never dared to say before, enough is enough. Today, I decide to change everything. As he stood in front of the mirror, something inside him shifted. For the first time in years, he didn't look away from his reflection. He saw the tired eyes, the unshaven face, the posture of a man who had carried too much failure, but he also saw something else, the man he could become if he chose to fight. The truth hit him hard. He had been waiting for someone else to save him, waiting for luck, waiting for the right time, waiting for a miracle. But no one was coming. No one was going to hand him the life he dreamed of. If he wanted change, he had to build it himself. That realization burned deep inside his chest. He felt both fear and excitement, fear of the unknown, but excitement that maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance. He told himself, I don't need to change the whole world today. I just need to change one thing, and then keep going. That single thought gave him more hope than he had felt in years. With trembling hands but a determined heart, he made a silent promise. The man who went to bed tonight would not be the same man who had woken up this morning. Change always begins with the smallest steps, and for him, that step was painfully simple, getting up and going for a walk. It had been months since he had moved his body with any sense of purpose. The morning air was cold, the streets were nearly empty, and as he walked, he felt the weight of his old self clinging to him like chains. Every step forward was a battle against the voices in his head that said, "You'll never change. You'll always be the same." But with every breath of fresh air, he felt something breaking free inside him. He didn't have a plan yet, no big vision, just the decision that today would be different. He realized that it wasn't about doing everything at once, it was about refusing to stay in the same place. That morning walk was not a victory in the eyes of the world, but to him, it was a declaration of war against the life that had been holding him hostage. As the days passed, he began to notice how heavy his past had been pressing down on him. Old failures played in his mind like broken records, the jobs he lost, the opportunities he wasted, the people who doubted him. For so long, he let those memories chain him to the ground, convincing himself that because he had failed before, he was destined to fail again. But this time, he stopped running from those memories and chose to face them. He sat with his pain and told himself, yes, I failed, but I'm still here. If I survived my worst days, then I can survive the journey to better days. For the first time, his failures stopped feeling like tombstones and started looking like lessons. The weight of regret didn't disappear overnight, but each time he reminded himself that his past didn't define his future, the burden grew lighter. Once he accepted his past, he turned his focus to his present. He knew that deciding to change was only the beginning, Real transformation required building habits that would carry him forward. At first, it was painfully difficult. He forced himself to wake up earlier, to exercise, to read instead of wasting hours scrolling through his phone. His body resisted, his mind screamed for comfort, but deep down, he knew that growth lived on the other side of discomfort. Every push-up, every page he read, every moment he refused to quit became a brick in the foundation of his new life. It wasn't glamorous, and no one was clapping for him, but he kept reminding himself, discipline is the bridge between who I am and who I want to be. Slowly, he started feeling proud of the man staring back at him in the mirror, not because he was perfect, but because he was finally moving forward. The early days of his transformation were not easy. Every new habit he tried to build came with pain, his muscles ached from workouts, his mind resisted new routines, and his heart often felt heavy with doubt. Waking up early was a battle, pushing himself through discomfort was exhausting, and sometimes he wondered if all this effort would even pay off. But in those moments, he reminded himself of the pain he had felt before, the pain of regret, of wasted years, of living a life that wasn't his. That pain was far worse than the temporary pain of discipline. He realized he had been suffering either way, but at least now, his suffering was shaping him into someone stronger. The old him craved comfort and remained stuck. The new him embraced discomfort and kept moving forward. Each day of discipline carved a little more strength into his character, and though progress was slow, he began to feel a pride he had never known before, the pride of keeping promises to himself. No transformation comes without resistance, and for him, the resistance wasn't just in his body, it was in his mind. The voices of doubt returned louder than ever, whispering that he was wasting his time, that people like him didn't change, that he was destined to remain invisible. Each time he felt tired, those voices tried to pull him back into the darkness he had escaped from. But this time, he refused to surrender. He realized those voices weren't truth, they were echoes of his old self, clinging desperately to survival. Instead of fighting them with anger, he began to drown them out with action. When the voice said, "You're too weak," he went for a run. When it said, "You're too dumb," he picked up another book. When it said, "You'll never succeed," he whispered back, "Watch me." Every action became a strike against doubt, and little by little, his confidence grew stronger than his fears. The weeks rolled into months, and for the first time in his life, he stayed consistent. He realized that greatness wasn't built in sudden bursts of energy, it was built in the quiet repetition of small actions done daily. Waking up early became normal. Pushing his body to exercise felt natural. Reading, journaling, and working toward his goals no longer felt like chores but like oxygen. He no longer needed motivation every day, because discipline had taken its place. And with discipline came results. His body grew stronger, his mind sharper, his energy higher. People around him began to notice the difference. Some admired his growth, others questioned it, but he no longer needed their validation. He wasn't changing for applause, he was changing because he had promised himself he would never go back to who he used to be. With his foundation built, he knew it was time to step beyond his comfort zone and face the world again. For too long, he had hidden in the shadows, avoiding risks, fearing failure. But now, he realized that failure was not his enemy, it was his teacher. He began applying for opportunities, speaking up in conversations, and sharing his ideas without fear of judgment. At first, rejection still stung, but instead of breaking him, it fueled him. Every no became a reminder that he was trying, that he was moving, that he was alive. Slowly, doors began to open, small opportunities at first, then larger ones. And as he walked through each door, he carried with him not just skill, but a fire that had been lit on the day he decided to change everything. Just when everything seemed to be moving forward, life threw him a curveball. A project he had poured his heart into failed. A friend he trusted walked away. The old him would have crumbled under the weight of disappointment, convincing himself he wasn't meant for success. But this time, he was different. Instead of letting the setback break him, he treated it as a test. He asked himself, will I go back to who I was, or will I rise stronger? It wasn't easy. There were nights when the pain cut deep, when the doubt tried to drag him back into the darkness. But instead of giving in, he worked harder. He doubled his efforts, sharpened his skills, and reminded himself that setbacks are not dead ends, they are detours. And slowly, the very failure that tried to bury him became the fuel that pushed him to the next level of growth. The rise of a new man. Through failure and persistence, something incredible began to happen. He no longer recognized himself. The man who once hid from challenges now chased them. The man who once drowned in excuses now lived by discipline. The man who once felt invisible now walked with presence, strength, and purpose. He realized that true transformation isn't about changing overnight, it's about choosing, every single day, to become better than yesterday. His life wasn't suddenly perfect, but it was real, strong, and his own. He had faced the storms, the failures, the voices of doubt, and instead of breaking, he had been remade. He was no longer defined by who he used to be, he was defined by the man he chose to become the day he decided to change everything. There came a morning when he woke up before sunrise, not out of obligation, but out of desire. 4 years, mornings had been his enemy, reminders of another day he didn't want to face, but now the silence of dawn became his companion. As he sat with a cup of coffee in hand, watching the first light break through the darkness, something inside him shifted. He realized that true change wasn't just about building habits or chasing goals, it was about reclaiming control over his own life. He wasn't just existing anymore, he was living with intention. The world outside still carried its chaos, but for the first time in years, he felt calm, steady, and grounded. That morning, he understood a truth most people run from. Change doesn't start with the world, it starts within. As his transformation became visible, not everyone supported him. Some friends mocked his discipline, saying he was trying too hard. Others doubted that his new life would last, whispering behind his back that he would eventually quit. In the past, those words would have crushed him, but now he saw them differently. He realized that people who didn't believe in him weren't really talking about him, they were exposing their own fears and limitations. Instead of letting their words wound him, he let them fuel him. He learned to walk away from conversations that drained his energy, to surround himself with people who inspired him, and to build a circle that lifted him higher. For the first time, he understood that not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Sometimes growth requires leaving old crowds behind. Despite his progress, he still stumbled. There were days when exhaustion got the better of him, when he skipped workouts, when old habits whispered temptations. But instead of letting those moments drag him into shame, he embraced them as proof that he was still human. Every failure became feedback, every setback a stepping stone. He learned that success is not about never falling, it's about rising faster every time you fall. With each recovery, he became more resilient, more determined. The man who once gave up after the first sign of difficulty now saw failure as part of the process, not the end of it. And slowly, what used to break him now built him. One evening, as he journaled about his journey, he asked himself a question he had never dared to face. Why am I doing all this? At first, the answers seemed simple. He wanted to be successful, respected, stronger. But as he dug deeper, he realized it wasn't just about him. He wanted to prove to others who struggled like he once did that change was possible. He wanted his story to be a light for those lost in their own darkness. That night, he discovered something more powerful than discipline or strength. He discovered purpose. And with purpose, every struggle took on new meaning. Pain wasn't just pain anymore, it was preparation. Sacrifice wasn't loss, it was investment. His journey was no longer just about escaping the man he used to be, it was about becoming the man who could inspire others to rise too. As his journey continued, he began to realize that the hardest battles were not fought in the gym, at work, or in the world outside, they were fought within his own mind. The old voice of doubt still visited him in the quiet moments, whispering temptations of comfort and excuses to quit. Some mornings he woke up exhausted, questioning whether all this effort was worth it. But instead of fearing those inner battles, he leaned into them. He understood now that growth was not the absence of struggle but the mastery of it. Each time he won against the voice that told him to take the easy way out, he grew stronger. And with each victory, his identity shifted further away from the man who once gave up and closer to the man who would never surrender. He no longer saw his mind as an enemy but as a battlefield where strength was forged, and every day he chose to fight, he was choosing to become unstoppable. Over time, the changes in his life became undeniable. He noticed it in the way he carried himself, standing taller, walking with confidence, speaking with clarity. He noticed it in his body, stronger muscles, more energy, and the glow of health he had never known before. He noticed it in his mind, sharp focus, discipline, and a calmness that replaced the chaos of his old life. But the most powerful victories were the smallest ones, choosing to wake up early even when tired, choosing to work hard even when no one was watching, choosing to stay consistent even when the results came slowly. These small choices stacked up into something greater than he had ever imagined. What once felt impossible now became his new normal, and those victories reminded him daily that greatness isn't built in one giant leap, it's built in countless small steps that no one else sees. One of the most surprising parts of his journey was realizing that people were watching. At first, he thought his fight was personal, invisible to the world. But slowly, family members noticed his discipline, co-workers saw his focus, strangers asked him about his routine. Without meaning to, he had become an example to others. People who once doubted him now came to him for advice. Friends who laughed at his habits began adopting them for themselves. He didn't need to preach or force anyone to change, his life itself became the message. And in those moments, he understood something powerful. The greatest way to inspire others is not by telling them what to do, but by showing them through the way you live. Looking back, he could barely recognize the man he used to be. The man who once lived in fear, drowning in excuses and regrets, had been replaced by someone unbreakable. He was not perfect, but he was powerful. He was not free of struggle, but he was free of surrender. He had become the kind of man who could stand in front of any obstacle and know, with certainty, that he had the strength to endure. His life was still a journey, still full of challenges, but he no longer feared them. In fact, he welcomed them, because he knew that every new challenge was another chance to grow. The day he decided to change everything was not just the start of a new life, it was the death of the man who once doubted his own worth. And from those ashes, a stronger, wiser, braver man was born. Years later, as he stood overlooking a sunset, he thought back to that morning, the morning he looked in the mirror and whispered, "Enough is enough." That single decision had rewritten the entire story of his life. He realized now that change doesn't come from waiting for the right time, or the right opportunity, or someone else's approval. Change begins the moment you decide that who you are today is not who you are destined to remain. His story became more than his own. It became a message for anyone lost in darkness, anyone who thinks they are too broken, too weak, or too late to change. He wanted the world to know that no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how hopeless it feels, one choice can transform everything. His journey was proof that rock bottom can become the solid ground you rise from, and that the light you're searching for is already inside you, waiting for the day you decide to awaken it.